And welcome into Contending Football. My name is James Flippin. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, wherever you may be and however you may be celebrating. We appreciate you joining us on this program, in which we will be getting into all the happenings of the NFL in Week 16 as we get closer to the playoffs. Of course, the playoffs, not a reality for many teams around the NFL, but there's plenty of teams that are still playing for things or potentially have things sewn up and can get things sewn up here today, as certain teams, if they lose or win or whatever it may be, are going to get their ticket to the playoffs punched. So we'll talk about all that. We've got our phone lines open, 855-908-5668. That's 855-908-5668. If you're watching us on either YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, whatever, then you see the phone number there. The phone lines will be open throughout, so feel free to give us a buzz. My name is James, and I am the co-founder of this here talk station platform, whatever you want to call it, the Contender. That's the Contender with a K. Download our app if you have not already. Check that out, and you'll get streaming live sports talk, the kind of sports talk. We're actually going to have really big things happening in 2022, as we will have our first daily show, our first daily morning show on the Contender platform. So we're excited about that. If you're listening to us on Colorcast, then we're excited about that as well. You can feel free to chat us on Colorcast. If you want to jump in as a co-caster, you can always do that. And again, like I said, the phone lines are open at 855-908-5668. Yesterday was Christmas. We had two games in the NFL, NFL doubleheader for the holiday. And one of those games was very revealing. Very revealing game between the Green Bay Packers and the Cleveland Browns. I have to just double check here on everything that we're doing okay broadcast wise. Checking with my producer is a good thing to do. Check in with some. Hope I'm not having an issue here with my broadcast. But if I am, then I apologize, and we appreciate you hanging with us. We've got some technical issues that we're kind of working through here. But Rob, let me know down the line if we're having some issues here still technically, but hopefully we're working through that. Again, we're on Colorcast, we're on the Contender, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. So it is a lot to ask of anyone given internet connection. And we may be running up against that right now. So we'll see how we do with that. We'll see if the phone lines make it as well. But yeah, last night with the Packers, and actually I guess it was more so, kind of early afternoon, late afternoon with the Packers and the Browns. Very revealing. Very revealing in the sense that at this point, you really have to worry and you really have to wonder about Baker Mayfield. And of course, I'm not saying anything that is new. I'm not identifying any kind of a concern that hasn't been identified before with the Brown signal caller. But with some of the stuff that he's done from a performance, like from a behavior perspective, I can't help but take a little bit of Schadenfreude pleasure out of the struggles of Baker Mayfield. Let's not forget, this is a guy who, when OBJ was traded from the Giants to the Browns, basically said, oh, well, the Giants fans haven't been showing up for years, or like, he'll see what it's like now to play in front of a real fan base or something like that, which, all due respect to the Cleveland Browns, is a disgrace to say. I mean, a joke to say for various reasons that I don't even need to get into right now. But you also had Baker Mayfield talking a lot of smack, talking a lot of trash on Daniel Jones, if you remember back, where Baker Mayfield basically in a very snide way said, they took that guy? I was thinking to myself, they took that guy? And I'd be lying if I didn't say that yesterday, when Baker Mayfield throws 4 picks, one of them the game-sealing interception, on which there was
pass interference, downfield contact. We'll get into that. Don't worry. If you're a Browns fan and you're listening, which, at this point, who knows how Browns fans are feeling because things have obviously not gone their way this season. But with the picks that Baker Mayfield threw yesterday, and knowing that he went number 1 overall the year that he was drafted, I couldn't help but think, they took that guy? They took that guy? Because, see, the one thing that I feel is very important within the NFL, and it's something that I've observed just as a fan of the NFL, you often hear guys talk about the notion of being humble or having humility. Something really humbled them in the concept of the National Football League. Players who tend to early on eschew that kind of thinking and for whatever reason don't have a lot of humility about the league, I feel like they're the ones that struggle in the long term. Because don't forget, it's not like Baker Mayfield never had any success. There was the one year, especially under Freddie Kitchens as offensive coordinator, where Baker Mayfield really looked like he maybe was coming into his own as a star quarterback in the NFL. But the issue being his play has regressed since that point. And to be fair to him, I don't really know what's going on there physically right now. There was several times on this particular show where I sat here and I said, how is Baker Mayfield even playing right now? How is Baker Mayfield out there? And they say, oh, well, he'll be active so long as he can go in warmups. It's like, but you just told me his left shoulder is basically like torn out of its socket. So I have no idea. I think that if nothing else, you can say that Baker Mayfield is a tough player. Certainly not a player that backs down from, the physical challenge of playing in the NFL. But I don't know what's going on otherwise. I mean, this is a guy who it's starting to look like the Cleveland Browns with all that they have going on, from, their ability to run the ball to a relatively solid defense. The one thing holding them back is the quarterback position. And when you took a guy number 1 overall within the last 5 years or whatever it was, that's not good. It means the one part of the rebuild that the Browns kind of couldn't miss on, they did. And now you come to this point going into the offseason where Baker Mayfield's going to be facing, they either got to pick up his 5th-year option or let him go cut bait and he's a free agent. Should the Browns really be paying Baker Mayfield $30 million a year? The answer is no. The only reason they would is because they were the ones that drafted him 1 overall. And if they feel pot committed, so to speak, to the quarterback and the developmental era that came with and is coming with Baker Mayfield, then they're going to have to say, yeah, we are going to pay him $30 million. And there's another player that I plan on kind of getting into today, Carson Wentz, that does lead the charge, lead the argument for the type of player that says and shows you just get the quarterback. Don't even worry about how exceptional they are. Don't even worry about how many games they're going to win you on their own. If there's somebody who can competently play the position and hold it down for you, let's say factor in injuries, all this kind of stuff, 12 to 14 games a year, that's pretty good. Now, I don't mean to, contradict myself. I think the Browns are in a position right now where they don't necessarily have to pay Baker Mayfield $30 million a year, and they shouldn't be feeling locked into, here he comes, guy who was a top pick at the quarterback position, up for his next contract. time to roll out the dough and sort of the market advance and everything on its own gradient and all that kind of stuff. This is how much he gets paid. I don't think they should do that. I think they have enough going on where they could try to caddy the position through free agency. I don't even know exactly who that's going to be. Maybe like a Jimmy Garoppolo or something like that. I have no idea if he's getting cut or what his deal is. Don't quote me on the name, but you understand the ilk. You try to get through to some other developmental prospect that maybe you take at the quarterback position, because I just can't see, with what we've seen out of Baker Mayfield, paying him like a guy who's a top 10 quarterback in the league. Now, if the Browns look at it like, his injuries and the physical stuff that he's been through, especially this year, then, that's sort of a disqualifier. And actually, we see something that goes beyond what's happened on the field and all this kind of stuff, then they will keep him. And they're going to have to pay, the money that it's going to take to bring him in. And I said it incorrectly earlier where I said, the fifth year option or whatever, he's playing on that now. If he's going to be a free agent, then obviously that's the reason that they're going to have to pay him money or cut bait. So 855-908-5668, 855-908-5668. We're on Colorcast. We're on the Contender. My name is James Flippin, and we appreciate you joining us here on Contending Football. Hopefully we've made it through some of our audio issues that were plaguing us earlier. The internet is only so fallible, or lack thereof. I will also just issue an advance warning to the listening audience that my brother is coming through my studio just any second here to pick up his pizza. He's getting a little bit of a pizza for football Sunday, and he's closing the door, so he's going to have to settle up there with but just keep that in mind, that if you hear any sort of extraneous audio, that's the reason why. But yeah, Baker Mayfield, Stefanski, their head coach, Cleveland, says that he's still the starter. No indication at this point that he's going to go with Case Keenum, just to kind of switch things up after the 4 interception game, but nobody would have blamed him if he decided to do that. There is something else that needs to be discussed as far as that last play of the game, or it wasn't actually the last play of the game, but where Baker Mayfield threw that 4th interception. It was absolutely a penalty on the Packers. There was, unquestionably downfield contact right before that pass was picked off. And it was a nice interception, don't get me wrong, but the contact immediately before it would have actually negated the interception if it was properly called. And, Baker Mayfield was out there kind of pleading his case, but obviously at that point it wasn't called. But there's been a lot of really, really, and I just want to extend my heartfelt appreciation to some of the people that make memes and such online. There's been some really great ones where the Packers are celebrating in the end zone, much like the teams do after an interception. And then the refs are kind of photoshopped in like as if they're celebrating as well. And that's very accurate for the Green Bay Packers. That's just very, very accurate for the way that which the refs favor their success. And really, and I've talked about this before, but the NFL tends to sort of like and maybe it's just human nature. Maybe I need to give it a more human nature curve where it's, the better teams get the calls. And so maybe that's just kind of part of it, is you make your own luck, so to speak. If you're playing well, then you're going to get the calls from the refs. But the Packers certainly are one of those teams that falls under that qualification. 855-908-5668, 855-908-5668. You're listening to The Contender, and you're also listening to Colorcast. Colorcast being an app that you can download and get both in-game and out-of-game commentary from people who are kind of just giving you their, as this show is named, NFL hot takes. And then on the Contender side, that's an app that is The Contender with a K, where we broadcast live streaming sports talk, also podcasts, but we're a sports talk platform that really delves into the more localized aspects of things. So we're covering Chicago sports, Washington, D.C. sports, and then also kind of, every now and then more national, but from a talk show perspective. As far as that Browns-Packers game, one of the other headlines that came out of it was that Aaron Rodgers broke Brett Favre's all-time touchdown record for the Packers for their franchise. Aaron Rodgers now has 443 touchdowns, breaking Favre's record. And I just feel like when I see that, and when I hear and understand the fact that people are making a big deal out of it, obviously they would, right? Like, I'm not saying that a record like that should go unnoticed or unappreciated, because it actually ends up being in some ways, as much about Favre as it is about Aaron Rodgers. But my perspective on it is, and I feel like this is going to be one of those things that is going to have me, an old man at the bar, arguing with somebody about whoever the new quarterback is or whatever it may be. And look, at the end of the day, chances are Tom Brady's going to have every single record and nobody's breaking it from a National Football League perspective. So that'll make things real easy. But some of the passing records and the ways in which quarterbacks specifically are evaluated through stats and trying to look at stats and all that kind of stuff, it really doesn't work going across eras. It's a shame in a way, because I know sports fans like to do that kind of stuff, like, taking a look at so-and-so's stats and then comparing them to this guy's stats and all this kind of thing. It unfortunately doesn't work in the NFL specifically. And I guess, gun to my head, that's probably true of almost every sport, right? I mean, just because the eras are always so different, and you want to talk about, like, modern nutrition and training, and that leaves out even like the steroids aspect of things, and how much better the travel is. I mean, I've even often thought about, in like baseball, for example, how much better just the gloves are, and how much better the fields are. Like the infields are better taken care of, and they're groomed and maintained every single day by a professional groundskeeping crew, which, yeah, that's not brand new or anything like that. But I mean, come on, the fields weren't as nice back in 1950 as they are now. So for a variety of reasons, you can't necessarily ever really compare stats. But it's especially bad with quarterbacks in the NFL. And the reason for that is the way things have changed over the last 20 years. The lack of ability to have legal downfield contact with a receiver as a defensive back. The way, if you hit a quarterback the wrong way, really, if you breathe on them the wrong way, it's going to be roughing the passer. Just some of the ways that other types of hits have been deemed illegal, and either unnecessary roughing or roughing the passer or whatever it may be. Those all are predicated on helping the offense, making it easier for these quarterbacks to play longer careers, making it, more plausible for them to put up big numbers during their prime, all that kind of stuff. So it's not for me to sit here and say Aaron Rodgers isn't great. He is. And he always will be considered an all-time great at the quarterback position. But I just hope that Brett Favre's legacy isn't diminished. And I get it. A lot of interceptions, right? Not the perfect player, but a guy who, in his time, few people's star burned brighter during it was really kind of along the lines of, like, the way Pat Mahomes has been the last few years. That, to me, was Brett Favre. And Aaron Rodgers, look, again, I understand. Huge star in his own right. Massive star. But just a different type of player, a different thing. Because don't forget, Brett Favre kind of drew the Packers out of that ineffectual era when, they didn't have much going on in the 80s and 90s, and at least up until when Favre took over. So Rodgers came in after that kind of legacy had been reestablished by the Brett Favre era. And it's not to take anything away from him. It's not to say that he hasn't established his own amazing legacy and, obviously Hall of Famer, all that kind of stuff, arguably one of the best of all time, if not, many people put him up there. But Brett Favre was and I feel like I'm like John Madden right now, but he was a special player, Brett Favre. And as much as anything, I think about those 442 touchdowns that he threw during an era that was very different. And maybe with even skill players that, skill position players that weren't as good or aren't as good as what Aaron Rodgers plays with. So that's my axe to grind here when I stick up for kind of Brett Favre and what he meant and means to the NFL's legacy. Moving on from that, again, phone lines are open today, 855-908-5668. If you're joining us on Facebook, if you're joining us on Twitter or Colorcast, if you're joining us on the Contender, we got the phone lines ready for you, 855-908-5668, and we'd love to hear from you as we talk the National Football League here in Week 16. My name is James Flippin, and you can follow me on the various social media channels and learn more about the Contender if you want to reach out and talk about that. Just so happens that I am a Giants fan, and one of the headlines emerging from the NFL today is based off an Adam Schefter report in which the Giants front office has reportedly decided to bring back both head coach Joe Judge and starting quarterback Daniel Jones. Now, that phrase in and of itself kind of has various meanings, right? Like, of course, Joe Judge being brought back could mean that he's not getting fired on Black Monday and isn't going to get canned as soon as the season is over. There was some sort of like vague wording, I think, in some of the reports that have come out, like where it's like, but that doesn't mean that later in the offseason there couldn't be. And I saw where some people were like, well, what does that mean? I think basically what that means is, of course, if the Giants surprise everybody and hire a GM from outside the organization, meaning they don't go with like a Kevin Abrams or something like that, then maybe that GM says, look, I'm going to put my own head coach in here, and I've got my own feelings about who this person should be and all this kind of stuff. And Mara, if you're bringing me in here to do this, and Mara, Tish, the whole brain trust, if you're bringing me in to try to upend this organization and fix things, you got to give me full control. And I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that could happen, and then Joe Judge gets fired sometime in advance of the draft. Certainly his coaching and what's happened for the Giants during his time last year's kind of like, semi-competitive finish notwithstanding, hasn't given you any reason to think there's no way this guy gets fired. There is plenty of way. I mean, the fact that they've gotten outscored in the last 2 minutes of the first half, like 70-0 or whatever ridiculous number it is, that in and of itself is kind of like grounds to get canned. And some of the other stuff that really bothers me about Joe Judge is the constant near delay of game penalties or using timeouts to avoid delay of game penalties. Of course, that kind of thing happens, in the NFL, and, you see it happen for every team, really. I mean, it's kind of just a fact of life. But the extent to which it happens with them with regularity is troubling. And again, not to overstate the one thing with the last 2 minutes of the drive, last 2 minutes of the first half, I should say, but earlier in the year, there were plenty of games where the Giants would get scored on at the end of the half, and then somebody gets a wraparound score on them, which is very un-Belichickian, by the way. If you're going to be anything like Bill Belichick, you're going to focus on those wraparound score opportunities, both avoiding them and then trying to get them when you have the opportunity, meaning scoring in the end of the first half and then trying to score at the start of the second half, depending on what possession is and all that kind of stuff. The fact that has been so bad for the Giants and Joe Judge is very troubling. And then you combine that with talking about Bill Belichick, the lack of aggressiveness from Joe Judge and the times at which he does or doesn't go for it on fourth down. That's not a good look for him. So the report is that they'll bring back Joe Judge. All along, all the sort of like insider stuff, if you care enough to read about it and focus on it, which unfortunately as a Giants fan, I have been, The scuttlebutt is that, Mara doesn't want to get rid of Judge, that he likes Judge, that he thinks he's got a long-term hire in place. This is a young guy who comes from a, impressive coaching tree, I guess. It doesn't necessarily mean his resume was anything because he wasn't a head coach. We know that, right? He was a special teams coach and more of like a, as far as I know, staff assistant with Alabama or whatever. So the jury absolutely has to be out on a guy like Joe Judge, but the report is that he's coming back. And the report is that Daniel Jones will be coming back. Now, again, to expand on the previous point, what does that even really mean? He's had a lot of issues staying healthy throughout his time as a starting quarterback. He has cut down on the turnovers that were sort of like a calling card issue for him earlier in his career. He has cut down on those, but he hasn't necessarily scored points. The Giants have struggled at times, if not basically all the time, to score touchdowns. And at some level that has to kind of fall on the starting quarterback. Yeah, you have issues with the offensive line, plenty of injuries at the skill positions. And Saquon Barkley was out last year and then out for a good portion of this year with his ankle and maybe still kind of working his way back from the knee. I don't know. But it's certainly not a perfect situation for Daniel Jones. But I mean, what NFL situation is perfect? So for Daniel Jones to come back doesn't mean they won't draft somebody at the quarterback position. Doesn't mean he isn't brought in and basically has competition and could end up losing the job. As sort of archaic of a notion that is. I mean, I have a close friend who's big into fantasy football, and we talk about this kind of stuff all the time. He thinks teams should always be looking to draft quarterbacks and have competition and push the issue of who's going to be the better player and who's the starter, who's the backup, all that kind of stuff. Maybe if they're younger players and you're not paying a lot against the cap to have them on the roster, maybe that's plausible. Certainly our fans in Chicago know that there's also the route of, paying veteran quarterbacks, a couple of them in that case, money to be your backups, and then eventually go slide with the new rookie that you're trying out. And that's got its own various ups and downs. You're listening to Contending Football. My name is James Flippin. You can call us on the telephone, 855-908-5668. And then we've also got our Colorcast broadcast going where you can chat us. You can co-cast. Check out that Colorcast app if you haven't. A lot of good stuff going on over there. And then here on The Contender, we broadcast localized sports talk content. So if you're a fan of Chicago, if you're a fan of Washington, D.C., eventually as we get into this new year in 2022, we'll be splitting the feed, meaning that our one app will have both a Chicago sports station and a DC sports station, and we kind of go from there. Circling back to those Giants for a second, by the way, Jake Fromm will be starting for them today. So if you do happen to be a Giants fan, you're wishing yourself a Merry Christmas and saying thank you very much for the fact that Mike Glennon will not be playing today. Because I know for me personally, and I'm not even saying this to be like mean or try to, trash on Mike Glennon or anything like that. God bless him. I couldn't play quarterback in the NFL, right? So I'm making that clear. But I feel like I might actually watch the game today. I couldn't watch with Mike Glennon. I did the first game that he played, and it's just so awful to watch a guy who never, ever even has like a prayer of connecting on a crossing route. You get to the point where you're like, why am I even watching this game right now? And then, other times where they might be moving the ball a little bit through this, that, the other type of play. Obviously, their offense is extremely challenged right now and just generally awful to watch. But then he'll throw some, awful interception. And it's like, why am I even watching this game right now? Just put the L on the schedule, get on to the next one, put the L on that one, and get us to the draft somehow. But I will say that given that Jake Fromm is a, young player, hasn't had much chance to play, was a standout in college, everybody likes the backup, right? Because it's eternal hope and optimism of some kind. I will watch today as the Giants take on the Eagles, and I will hope against hope that maybe Jake Fromm can actually move the ball a little bit, and that by halftime I won't be muttering to myself and deciding to turn the game off. Speaking of the Philadelphia Eagles, we had yesterday the official cash of that Carson Wentz trade from Philadelphia to Indianapolis. The amount of time and the number of snaps that Carson Wentz played in this year, it's now guaranteed that Philadelphia will get a first-round pick from Indianapolis. And, I think I've been hard on Carson Wentz. A lot of people have been at times, but maybe when combined with some decent health on his part, right? Like at the beginning of the year, I remember back to preseason where there was something with Carson Wentz. I don't know if it was like both ankles that he sprained or something like that. And he was maybe in danger of, potentially missing the first game or something like that. And I just thought to myself, man, this guy is one of those guys that just cannot stay healthy. And it's a brutal reality of the NFL, but that's part of it. Staying healthy, even if it's just luck or if there is some way you fall or take a hit or something, staying healthy is part of the NFL. And Carson Wentz, since then, having played through that situation, has been really reliable for the Colts this year. And, dare I say, in addition to the way that he's played, kind of just a solid football style that isn't losing games for the Colts, which are predicated on running the ball and playing defense, he is kind of answering his critics and maybe potentially kind of reaching that potential that was seen for him once upon a time when Philadelphia took him high out of North Dakota State. So I look at the whole situation with Carson Wentz as maybe myself, maybe others being a little bit unfair at times. And this connects back to the Baker Mayfield. Frankly, it connects to the way that I tend to feel about Daniel Jones. You take a quarterback in the first round, if they show you that they can be solid and kind of keep you in games, potentially win you some of the time, potentially lose you some of the time, there's value in a guy like that. There is. Because the alternative, being completely in QB purgatory and trying to chase through and burn through draft picks and free agency signings and all this kind of thing, and you feel like you're chasing after your starter year after year after year, that can be even worse. And I feel as though a guy like Carson Wentz connect to a guy like Baker Mayfield, throw in a conversation like a Daniel Jones, all of it makes me start to wonder what really is the end goal when you're trying to draft, develop, and put together the quarterback position. Because some of those guys where you think to yourself, they could be worse, they have value in this modern NFL. Because I see a lot of teams, and you look at a lot of situations where, no, it couldn't be worse. And you've got all kinds of different retreads and chasing after, quarterbacks in the draft and all this kind of stuff. And those teams are the ones that continuously stink. And as far as the Giants are concerned, like, for example, call me crazy, but I just don't necessarily know if I'm in a rush to get rid of a Daniel Jones. Because again, I don't know how much you're going to have to pay him. The whole Baker Mayfield aspect of this is, it seems like everywhere you look, all the reporting you read, everything that's talked about is that this guy's gunning for upwards of $30 million. That, to me, is going to put you in a situation and hamstring you from an assets perspective where I don't necessarily understand it. But maybe that's inaccurate. Maybe you can sign him for a lesser deal. I've often felt like the guys that you can go after, and maybe this is a one-off and not a great solid example you're going to point to and say, oh, that's just a rarity or whatever. But what about a Ryan Tannehill? A guy who was very athletic, had a lot of potential, never really put it together in Miami in full, but then has a second act in Tennessee. And speaking of Tennessee, is Marcus Mariota a guy who has maybe some second half of his career as he gets ready to be an outright free agent now? I don't know. The quarterback thing, and I've talked about this where like I talked about Jonathan Taylor last week, and I said that's a guy who, to me, that's the real MVP of the National Football League because that position group, it's so hard to separate yourself from the also rans. And it's so hard to consistently be an impact player at the running back position that I'll say, give that guy the hardware as opposed to whoever the quarterback position is. And, I understand, for example, Aaron Rodgers this particular year, all that's gone on for the Packers, the fact that when Jordan Love actually did play the game, he had a worse game than Baker Mayfield yesterday. That in and of itself argues for the guy being the MVP because just how much the team has been driven by and kind of predicated on his success. That obviously means the term most valuable applies. But I just look at those running backs and I say, wow, the ones that really do have major take over the game type potential, not only is it not, just a dime a dozen, it's not the opposite of dime a dozen. You're talking about a handful of guys, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe. And, quarterback, I feel like it's closer to about 10 if everybody's healthy, 8 to 10. So double versus the one. And also a position in the running back where most of the time guys are swapping in and out. It's running back by committee. Obviously, those quarterbacks, that's not really done outside of New Orleans right now. Thought it was interesting to point this out. And by the way, phone lines will be open throughout the remainder of the show, 855-908-5668. My name is James Flippin. If you're joining us on Colorcast, if you're joining us on the Contender, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, whatever, feel free to give us a buzz and let us know how this Sunday is going for you, this football Sunday. It's also obviously the day after Christmas, which is kind of, weird having Sunday the day after Christmas. But I saw this story and felt like I'd bring this up. The NFL's doctor, I think it's Stills or Sills. David, is it David Sills? Alan Sills. He has put out the word here where the NFL, at least, right? So semi-anecdotal, and they're studying only their population of players, and by definition, they're not necessarily average people. But the NFL's doctor has cast doubt on the notion of asymptomatic spread with COVID-19. And this comes as the nation deals with the increase in Omicron cases. And of course, we've also got the NFL in and of itself dealing with plenty of positive cases and how that wreaks havoc on rosters. But the NFL's doctor has said the NFL is not really seeing asymptomatic spread. It's always symptomatic spread. And I think the more we see any kind of studies or any kind of focus on that kind of thing is pretty interesting and noteworthy, and the kind of thing I would imagine news organizations would want to focus on because of the story that it tells. Up until this point, there's always been kind of this fearful question, lack of understanding. Why would it be that this particular disease has such a high level or a concerning level, maybe, of asymptomatic spread? And nobody really knows for sure, right? Like, especially early on when all this was still kind of unfolding, nobody knew anything. It seemed like this thing came from a lab in China, still does. Whether or not it was purposefully leaked or if it came out by accident, maybe we'll never know. But, it came from a lab in China. Nobody really knew what was going on with this thing. The notion of asymptomatic spread was kind of maybe not necessarily that plausible to somebody like me, but who knows? And I have no idea. So when I see the NFL's doctor saying, hey, just so you know, our players are all getting cases of COVID-19 through symptomatic spread, I say, huh, that's interesting. That's good to know. And that's something where I'd like to have, more reporting on something like that, and maybe hopefully more understanding of what is or isn't the reality there. Because I think in everyday life and sort of in the context of everyday reporting, you don't necessarily hear a lot about that. Certainly not anymore. Once upon a time, it was a lot of focus on so-called asymptomatic spread, and people were supposed to wear face masks, not the football variety, by the way. But they were supposed to wear face masks because of asymptomatic spread, and you're not sure if you're, contagious or not, which is very scary, right? Like that's kind of like, oh, I don't really know. I could be harming other people that I care about and all that kind of stuff. But now, if you see this story here with the NFL doctor saying we're seeing symptomatic spread, I'd be interested to see more reporting on that from a society-wide perspective. 855-908-5668. By the way, the Ravens really got screwed over by injury and COVID here, because not only is Lamar Jackson out with his ankle, but now you've got Huntley out with COVID. So it comes down to Josh Johnson starting. And it's kind of mean to look at it this way, but I saw where I think it was the Barstool Ravens writer put up a picture of Josh Johnson's Wikipedia page and the teams and years that he's played for different. And he said, you never want to see this next year starting quarterback. And obviously it's got plenty of AAFC teams in there and maybe a Arena Football League. I don't even know. But Josh Johnson will be starting for Baltimore. And, this is something that I was thinking about in this context. I was on the precipice. I was about to say, one of the things I've been sort of thinking of getting into is just about how the Ravens are the best NFL organization, one of the best in sports, really. Harbaugh's Army, as they like to be known. Whether it's injuries, free agency loss, whatever may come to pass for the Ravens, they're still good. They're still competitive. And yes, they've had some tough losses this year, controversial as well, where Harbaugh decided to go for 2 at the end of the game or whatever, which, I actually kind of like, because overtime is such a crapshoot. You've got the game right there in front of you, so why not go win it? But if the Ravens today, with, Jackson being out, and then, Huntley can't play either because of the whole COVID testing positive, you've got them going up against a desperate division rival 8-6 Bengals team. If the Ravens hang in or obviously win this game, they're the best NFL organization by far until further notice. And that was how I will refer to them. Until someone else impresses me. And I don't even give me the Patriots, because I understand that's a fair counter. But let's see that continue for another few years at least, because I just want to make sure. I just want to make sure that it's not fully sort of Brady and Belichick at the same time in the 50-50 mix. Obviously, the Patriots are doing great this year, but let's just say. But for the time being, if the Ravens hold on in this game and make it competitive, potentially win it, they're the best NFL organization by far until further notice. And that is how I will refer to them, and that is how I will know it. And I am jealous, frankly, as a Giants fan, the fact that they've got their head coach. I see what's especially painful for me as a Giants fan is that sometimes I allow these little narratives to develop in my head. And Jim Harbaugh, I should say, was a special teams coach before getting the job with the Ravens. And, the Ravens, obviously, like I said, extremely well run, great front office, great owner, fan base, the whole thing. I had dreams of Joe Judge, the special teams coach, coming in and becoming the same type of guy for the Giants. As silly as that may be, to kind of try to tie someone's fate to whatever their previous coaching role was, I said, oh, yeah, well, you think it's weird they hired a special teams coach? Well, did you know that John Harbaugh was as well? So, again, obviously that hasn't worked out so well for the Giants up until this point. But I find myself, jealous of the organization that the Ravens have and the way in which that's run and just the way that they're kind of competitive all the time. It's really crazy when you think about the fact that that division that they're in has two teams like that, because it's the Pittsburgh Steelers and it's the Baltimore Ravens in the same division. And both teams are never that far from being competitive if they're not right at that same moment. Pretty good stuff for those fan bases, I will say. All right, let's take a look at some of these games. We've got about 10 minutes left to play with here. The phone lines will remain open. Again, my name is James Flippin here on Contending Football, 855-908-5668, 855-908-5668. Those are the phone lines, and they're brought to you by the Contender app. Check out the Contender app in the iPhone App Store or in Google Play. That's the Contender with a K. Download the app, and you've got all our podcasts and, of course, our live streaming content as well. Plenty of sports talk going on our platform. So Giants and Eagles at 1 o'clock. The Eagles here are hanging on to their playoff life at 500, 7-7. Of course, we know the Eagles are effectively a extremely run-based team, and the kind of team that will just keep coming at you with their run game. The times that they've found themselves kind of getting into trouble, I think, is when they get away from that. So we'll see with the Giants if the Giants are able to kind of, focus on trying to force the Eagles to maybe become less one-dimensional. And if those Giants are able to, stack the box, as they say, and do some things that maybe can provide some help on the run defense side. Rams and Vikings, another 1 o'clock game. This is in Minnesota. The Vikings, very up and down team this year. They're still, clinging to their playoff hopes at this point. They're 7-7. The Rams, really one of the better teams in the NFL at 10-4. The Vikings have had a lot of success lately against the Rams, going back, for however many seasons it's been. They've won 5 of the last 6 games against those Rams. So, the Rams will be looking to reverse a trend there. But the Vikings, like I said, they should be the more kind of desperate team, the more hungry team. And we'll see how that comes out in the wash, as they say, with the game today in Minnesota. Bills and Patriots. This one might be the game of the week. You've got the Bills with their backs really up against the wall here, and now they have to go on the road to face New England, who at 9-5 is currently in first place in the AFC East. The Bills at 8-6, just one game off the pace. And if you recall, it was a couple of weeks ago when they had that game on Monday Night Football in the very windy Orchard Park, where the Patriots basically just bullied them on the ground. And I think Mac Jones threw the ball like 3 times. Not even kidding. I'm not exaggerating. It was like a 3-attempt stat sheet for him. And the Patriots just kind of road graded them with their running game. And then there was some, bad blood between the Bills and their beat reporters after the game and all this kind of stuff. So this is a game that the Bills absolutely have to have. And, you hope for their sake that they can kind of keep pace with a Patriots team that has just been getting better as the season goes on. And it is effectively a battle for the division, as we get down to the nitty gritty here and not much time left in the season. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and just answer. I'm going to answer the phone right now because my boy Doug is calling me now. Doug, I'm just going to tell you, you are on the air right now. So if you would rather call me back or you'd rather me call you back, feel free to just hang up the phone right now. But otherwise, I'm broadcasting. I'm getting Contending Football down to the wire here. So I figured I'd answer the phone. How's it going? Merry Christmas. I did. All right. You know what? If it is a good time to call, I'm just going to ask you to actually call the actual phone number because it'll be a lot easier to hear you. So, if you wouldn't mind doing that, can I just text that to you?
No problem.
All right. Bye. All right. So this is good. This is good. This is an interactive program here. We make sure that the Colorcast audience can actually hear Doug now. And we make sure that the Contender audience can hear him as well by sending him the actual phone line. And, that'll make it easier for everybody to hear him and understand what we're talking about, which if my assumptions are correct, he is going to be calling about fantasy football. And you know what? That's a nice little subject to finish the show on today. We'll do a little fantasy football. We'll see what's going on with his playoff pursuit, which I'm sure is what he's calling about. But yeah, Bills, Patriots, that's a good game to watch at 1:00 if you have it on your local broadcast or if you have the NFL ticket or whatever. That's one I'd definitely check out. Buccaneers and Panthers. Buccaneers kind of looking to just bully their way through the season and cement their role going into the playoffs. The Panthers at 5-9. Sam Darnold, I guess, is going to play today for Carolina. So Jets fans, a familiar face and a familiar name for them. Speaking of those Jets, the Jets and the Jaguars will be facing off today, and that's a matchup of the top two quarterbacks taken with Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson. So, we'll see what happens with that. But we'll put that conversation on hold for now and bring in Doug Nice as he joins us on the phones now. Doug, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right,
very
good.
well.
So what's going on? I have a feeling that you have some fantasy football stuff that's going on.
Yes, I have a question. I'm running out of time.
All right, go ahead.
So I have Devontae Parker going at Monday, and I have Odell Beckham going in like 8 minutes.
Okay.
5 minutes.
Okay.
And I'm kind of in a situation. I'm not sure what to do here. Maybe someone else. Maybe I'm not looking at it properly. This is the semifinals of the playoffs.
I mean, my initial thought is Odell Beckham because for one thing, he's been productive in his time with the Rams. Right? You've got a Minnesota Vikings team that doesn't have a very strong defense, but at times can put points up on the board. So maybe this turns into a little bit of a shootout. You also know that the Saints defense may be sort of like rounding into form a little bit because they really kicked the crap out of the Bucs last week. So, I don't know. I mean, look, Devontae Parker, the other thing is Jalen Waddle is supposed to play, right? So at least in theory, you are kind of like maybe splitting targets a little bit. Whereas it seems like Beckham's kind of settling into that number 2 role for the Rams. So I would probably go. Plus, that you tend to feel very importantly that you have unleashed Odell on the league when you start him at times. So
yes, but I have started Odell in the league. He has been unleashed.
Yeah, you've unleashed him on the league in times. So I don't know. Maybe that's
that
also
one,
an old Giant
one
fan
point
kind of like
yesterday,
dying
last
hard
week,
there. But I would probably go ODBZ.
Okay. That 1 point last week is a little concerning. I don't know what that was. I know he's coming off the COVID thing, and Cooper Kupp just be getting dumb targets, so I don't really know. So when I look at the whole target share thing, I mean, you got Cooper Kupp grabbing up those targets. Van Jefferson's out there, and then Devontae Parker has Gesicki and Waddle.
Well, one thing
it's kind of I feel like it's similar.
One thing that I would say to keep in mind, just I say definitely whatever your like actual gut feeling is more than anything, like what's going to bother you more depending on which it goes. That's the pick that I would make, especially since it's the playoffs, because then you at least be like, you know what, that's what I wanted to do. I didn't let somebody talk me into it. And if you feel like Parker's the better guy, then stick with him because, again, I don't think the Saints have like a good secondary. It's just maybe it's recency bias. They always play well against Brady for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know.
It is.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for the advice. No, it was actually good just to talk to someone. Sometimes people listening to the show, sometimes it's good just to talk out what you're feeling. Yeah. And like you say, you got to go with your gut sometimes. You can't really go off what the pundits say.
That's very,
go with
very
your eye test and your gut is telling you.
The fantasy program that we have on our station here, the Contender, is go with your gut. So I know our guy Joe Vitruba would be passionately saying, go with your gut. whatever you think. If you're feeling Devontae Parker because you just have that feeling and you're like, you know what, ODB is usually my guy, but I might have to unleash Parker on the league, then you might have to do that.
I feel you.
You might have to do
I
that.
go for that consistency, and I don't know. We'll see. I got to make this decision.
Yeah, I don't want to keep you too long.
Next 4 minutes. But thank you, Contender. I appreciate the help
Absolutely.
and the
Merry
vote of
Christmas.
confidence in what I feel.
Well, good stuff, and Merry Christmas, and I hope everything's good with the family. We'll talk to you soon, all right?
All right, guys. Take care.
All right, man. All right, peace. All right, there goes Doug Nice. Typically a guy who comes in and, contributes to the discussion, but here he's got a question. So, I mean, what do I know? I'm in one of my 3 leagues. I did make the fantasy playoffs, but the other 2 I did not. Oh no, I shouldn't say that. I actually made the playoffs in the other 2 out of 3. I made the playoffs, but I lost in the first round in one of them. So, that was a quick exit. And it was unfortunate. So I guess I just kind of quickly put it out of my mind. But I did actually make the playoffs in that league. We just lost. We got bounced. Now in this other league, my last remaining league, I'm trying to survive here. Already down a decent little bit, having gone up against AJ Brown and with my Jonathan Taylor not having been kind of as productive as I would have liked. But what are you going to do? That's life, right? So we also know the Lions and Falcons are squaring off. That's kind of a hold your nose game. Chargers, Texans, the Chargers looking to continue their hot play lately. And the Texans, I guess, just kind of hoping to play spoiler as much as anything. Ravens, Bengals, like we said, that's a really good game. That's a game where you have the option to watch that one. You might want to do that one. I mean, I already put my hat in the ring for Bills and Patriots, but I kind of like the Bills. So that's probably my bias there showing its head. You might actually be better off if you can watching that Ravens Bengals game because, all those AFC North games are just like harder hitting for whatever reason. Just a lot of hitting intensity when it comes to those particular games. So, all right, almost out of time here on Contending Football. I really want to just take a second to say happy holidays to all of our listeners. Merry Christmas. If you've made the Contender a part of your listening experience at any point, we so appreciate that. We'd invite you to download the app if you have not already. That's the Contender with a K. You can check it out in the App Store or in Google Play and enjoy these final moments of the NFL regular season. Even if your team stinks, which trust me, mine does. I'm a Giants fan. Try to enjoy the games because you will miss them when there's nothing going on in February and March. And if you're a baseball fan, you're like, all right, well, at least I got that going. And of course, college basketball will be rounding into form. But enjoy the last little bit of NFL football Sundays. And of course, if your team is headed to the playoffs, then good luck and stick with us here on the Contender because we've got you covered. I'm James Flippin. Catch you next time on Contending Football.